Wherever you go, I promise you won't escape me! You can run as far as you want! I'll follow you to the ends of hell! And my blade will be the last thing you see! I'll never forgive you for what you've done!
Okay, time for Demon Slayer. Or as one of my friends calls it, JoJo with swords. I have been following Demon Slayer for a while now. Hell, I even made a Demon Slayer class like a year and a half ago, sometime around there, that I'm still super proud of. And if enough of you guys want it, maybe I can go update that to the new 2024 rules. But today you guys aren't here for a class, so instead, let's get into the world of Demon Slayer. Demon Slayer takes place in, well, early 19th century Japan actually, during the Taisho period. But there are a couple notable differences, like color-changing sun-charged steel, talking birds, and the Demon King of Pop turning people into monsters with just the smallest amount of his blood. And Michael Jackson here, or Muzan, is the catalyst for this entire story, because without him, Tanjiro would have never left his home, because his sister would have never been turned into a demon. There would be no Demon Slayer Corps because, well, who's gonna slay demons if there are no demons? You don't call the Ghostbusters if you're not dealing with ghosts. And the story of Muzan is, well, fittingly dark for a man called the Demon King. Muzan has always been close to and afraid of death, almost being pronounced dead at birth, and being sickly throughout his entire life. And that only changed after a strange doctor gave him medicine made with a blue spider lily. And if you didn't know, these flowers here are spider lilies. They're usually used to represent death in Japanese culture. So if you ever wonder why so many anime characters get tearful send-offs with these flowers and then die shortly afterwards, that's why. Anyways, once Muzan took this special medicine, nothing happened. So as you do, he murdered his doctor in cold blood before the effects could kick in. Which, with joke's on him, it made him immortal. But not perfectly so. He was still weak to the sun, and since he just murdered his doctor, there was no one else to make more medicine for him to kind of finish off the immortality. And since he had no idea where the doctor even got the blue spider lilies, he was gonna have to go do that on his own too. And that's kind of what got everything in motion. Muzan looking for these flowers because even when he is damn near completely immortal, he is still deathly afraid of death. Which led to Muzan making demons to help him look for the flowers, but demons also need to eat humans to survive. And if you didn't know, humans don't typically like to be eaten, so the Demon Slayer Corps was created to protect humans. Along the way, they were also taught breathing styles, patterns of breathing that increase their strength, speed, and other senses, allowing the Demon Slayers to actually compete with demons and not just get steamrolled. Which eventually leads us to the start of the show with the most wholesome good boy in anime, Tanjiro Kamado, who's very simply going into town for the day to sell charcoal that his family made. And after a night forcefully spent with a family friend so he wasn't walking through the woods in the night, Tanjiro makes his way home to a bloodbath, finding his family dead, all save for his younger sister Nezuko. And from there, things go by pretty quickly. Nezuko turns into a demon and tries to eat Tanjiro. They're attacked by a demon slayer as she gains control. Tanjiro almost kills said demon slayer with a fake-out axe throw, and he turns out to be one of the strongest slayers in the Corps, and the two of them are sent off to train under Gyu's master. Well, Tanjiro is. Nezuko just kind of naps through the next 2 years while Tanjiro trains his body and learns how to do water breathing. Thankfully though, through Nezuko's willpower and some sort of mutation, she actually doesn't need any blood to survive like other demons. She can just sleep to recover and even get stronger, so sleeping for 2 years straight was actually kind of like her own little training arc. And that brings us to the beginning of the journey these two take together. And since their backstories are so closely tied, literally being the same event, I thought it might be fun to do these two side by side. Or not, that might be a bit too hard for me to edit, we will see. And as the older of the two living siblings, let's start with Tanjiro first. So it's pretty easy to see that since this setting is mostly real world, Tanjiro is a human, like most people. But unlike them, he has an oddly strong sense of smell, like super strong. Again, he can smell blood from like miles away. His family also lived off of burning charcoal to, sell in towns. So this makes his species and background actually super easy. Firstly, you make him a human with the alert feet and perception to cover his smell, and you give him the farmer background, which is really the closest thing I can think of to charcoal burning. Sure, it's not like the technical definition of farming, but it's still a product they're creating through manual labor. And if it's close enough for government work, it's close enough for me. The farmer background also kind of helps cover something else that's special with Tanjiro, since it gives him the tough feet. And while he certainly can take a beating and keep on kicking, he has a stupidly hard head. And I don't mean like metaphorically he's stubborn. His skull is harder than a demon's, and he uses it plenty of times to surprise headbutt people or demons and catch them off guard. Cause seriously, who expects the 5'5" teenager to bash your punch away with their skull. Now, since Tanjiro and Nezuko grew up in the same family, and are siblings, they would be the same. But aside from Nezuko being turned into a demon and changing her biology, she also has very little to no memory of her time as a human, outside of some small visions of her past or her family. And these changes to her body were pretty drastic. First off, she can change sizes, going from a small Nezuko who can fit in this box, to a full-grown Nezuko that can, and will, beat the stuffing out of anyone who threatens her brother, but it also just makes her a lot stronger and gives her a healing ability. And just like the father of all demons, it makes her very Irish, to the point that she burns in the sunlight. But, spoiler warning, she actually does overcome this weakness. At first for Nezuko, I did want to go with like a tiefling because a demon girl, but demons in this world aren't the same as demons in D&D or other mythology. They aren't unholy monsters, they're closer to undead, and specifically with their need for human blood, vampires. Which had me looking at the Dhampir lineage for a while, which gives a bite attack as well as some other vampiric themed stuff, but again, Nezuko is different. Not only does she not need blood, even if she has been tempted before, she overcame her weakness to the sun, and is overall just a very different type of creature from the other demons in Demon Slayer. She sleeps to get stronger, and she actually has a way to hurt demons in a meaningful way, a lot like the special swords of the Demon Slayers. And her flames can even purge a demon poison from a human's body without harming the person at all, only burning away the demon cells. So in light of that, I decided to go with a reborn instead. So she is still very hard to kill from being a demon, and can get flashes of her old life as a human in certain stressful situations, like when Tanjiro needed help fighting the spider child when she first unlocked her bloodburst. And obviously I can't get everything for her from her lineage, like her healing fire and stuff, but the flavor of the reborn just feels right for Nezuko. Now back to Tanjiro, there is one issue when it comes to building him. His stats. Because not only is he strong, nimble, can take a hit, but he's also fairly smart, has a great perception, and outside of demons who just aren't interested in talking, he can generally talk his way through most encounters, or at the very least get the other side to compromise. And since I am still using standard array, that's kinda hard. So I had to make some concessions in certain areas, because there are just some stats that Tanjiro isn't gonna need. Strength though is not one of those, just look at him, he is ripped, so I'm going to set him off with an 18 in strength, a 14 in con, plus another 14 in wisdom for his sense of smell. Also, another point for his high wisdom is that wisdom is usually used for like willpower, and Tanjiro not only realized that he was in an illusion on this demon train, but when the only way out was to self-delete in the fake world, he did it over and over and over again, until he finally got back to the real world for some amount of time. And that takes a lot of willpower to not only do, but also to realize when you're finally back in the real world so you don't actually do it for real. His charisma is sitting at 12 so he can still talk to people and talk his way out of stuff, since despite being from a remote village, and even then living on the outskirts, he's still very well liked and doesn't seem to have trouble talking to anyone or getting along with people. Dex is also fine at 10, yes he dodges traps and is light on his feet, but he really just doesn't need it to be all that high. Now, one thing, because Tanjiro really doesn't need it, he is dumping intelligence. I know he isn't dumb, a little dense sometimes, but not really dumb. It's just that nothing he uses really needs intelligence to be all that high. And it's not like there aren't a few standout moments. You're probably going to find that low intelligence is a little bit of a theme in this party. But moving on, Nezuko's stats are quite a bit different. Being a demon, her body is already a lot different from how it was before, with her almost constantly going stronger, either as a fight goes on, or just whenever she takes a nap. And she is a lot stronger than you would think for a girl of her size. Kicking a weaker demon in the face is so hard that his head spun around multiple times, and later beating Daki, one of the upper moons, into the ground. So, some of her highest stats are going to be strength, because how else is she going to stomp through somebody else's spine, and constitution, since she really doesn't dodge much, like sometimes she does for sure, but then other times she just takes the hit, which may or may not always be the best of ideas. But what does Nezuko care when she can just regrow her arm in like half a second anyway? She does need some dex for her AC, but again, she tends to just kind of tank stuff and heal it up later. But she's far from clumsy, so I think 13 is fine. Plus I kind of need it for something else later. I'm also putting her wisdom at 13, both for AC like with dexterity, but also for perception, since demon senses are just kind of better than normal human senses. Now, I did have a bit of a hard time picking between charisma and intelligence for Nezuko's lowest stat, since on one hand, she can't really talk much, if at all, just making noises and grunts, but on the other hand, she is very childlike. Plus, most people really seem to like her, so... Okay, yeah, 10 charisma and 8 intelligence like her brother. Just look at those eyes. Is there anything going on behind them? But let's flip back to Tanjiro for a minute, since unlike most characters I end up making, he can mostly be covered by a single class. But before that, let's talk about his actual abilities, since I only gave a brief look at his training before. Tanjiro uses the water-breathing style of demon slaying techniques, which has nothing to do with actually breathing underwater, and is more of a mimicking the flow and flexibility of water, being able to adapt quickly and move as if your body was water. It did involve increasing your lung capacity, but that's kind of a thing with most breathing styles. Okay, so something to point out here that I'm not a huge fan of is that all these fancy stylistic effects like the water on Tanjiro's blade, the sparks off Zenitsu's, or anything else, aside from the demon's blood arts, are not canonically there. They're only there for the viewers. Whenever they use these techniques, there's nothing actually happening element-wise. And while on one hand I think that's kind of dumb given certain things that we see, like Zenitsu actually making a thunderclap with how fast he is, it does actually help me more accurately build Tanjiro. Because if I had to give this boy sword fighting, water, and fire powers that were only used via his sword, well, I've already made a homebrew class just for that. But since these are all just effects, and these techniques are in fact just precise sword motions, and so on, I can get most everything I need from the fighter. Tanjiro has a bunch of different forms for his water breathing. 10 in fact. But on top of that, he also has the Dance of the Fire God, giving him another 12 forms ranging from normal slashes, spinning parries, flips, thrusts, and so on. But the most important part is that if you perform the necessary breathing patterns correctly for each step of this dance, you can keep repeating it without risking exhaustion. Tanjiro's father did this for an extended period of time, I think it was from dusk till dawn, and he was on death's door when he did this. And as kind of basic as it sounds, to cover this many techniques that range from attacking, defending, counterattacks, and more, the maneuvers from Battlemaster kind of just do that. And there's obviously going to be some overlap between the water breathing and Dance of the Fire God when it comes to which maneuvers cover which techniques. I just went with these ones here because they seem the most fitting, really. Oh, and having this many maneuvers does put him all the way at level 15, by the way. And that might seem a bit high, but given what he's been through by the end of the manga, I honestly think he could go a little bit higher. I know I usually only go off the anime, but given how close the anime actually is to the ending of the series, I think it's fine. This also means Tanjiro gets fighter features like Second Wind, Extra Attack, and I know the See-Through World hasn't shown up in the anime yet, but I feel like Know Your Enemy could kind of work for that. It's a bit of a stretch, but you're going to get it anyway as a Battlemaster. And one of the most important features for this is Relentless, which lets Tanjiro use his maneuvers indefinitely. As long as Tanjiro decides to only use D8s instead of D10s, meaning he can constantly keep up his Dance of the Fire God and fight for hours if needed. Along the way, he's also going to get a couple feats and ASIs, which being level 15, he gets a lot of, like the Slasher feat for a +1 to the dex, reducing speed and giving disadvantage on attacks. Athlete and Observant feats, again, he is ripped, and with a stupidly strong sense of smell. And for his ASIs, I'm giving him a bump to Dex and Con for one reason. That being that Tanjiro needs the Dex to jump over to Monk for just a few levels, enough to get the Kensei subclass, which does put him at a total level of 18, which is really high, but like I said before, with how close the anime is to the end of the series, I think it's fine. We see Tanjiro do some ridiculous stuff, so him being a really high-level fighter with how fast he attacks and how he maneuvers, yeah. But I wanted to go with a few levels of Monk for a couple reasons. Yes, the Demon Slayer's uniform is supposedly very strong and acts like armor, but against the demons Tanjiro is fighting, it might as well just be normal cotton. So he needs to be able to block or dodge things. He does have some skill in hand-to-hand combat as well, as shown when he rocked Inosuke and broke his ribs with another headbutt, but I mostly want to cover the blocking part from all of his different techniques. And with the updated rules for the Monk, instead of Deflect Missile, Tanjiro gets Deflect Attacks, which works on melee and range attacks, and if possible, lets you redirect an attack. He can also just up his AC with Agile Parry if he needs to. But the thing that I really wanted, kinda for the memes, was Calligraphy, the strongest thing he could have. If you know the joke, you've been watching these kind of videos since long before I started making them. I do really wish I was able to get the watery or fire effects on his attacks, but just like in the show, that can be flavor. I'm just glad I could cover some of his main techniques, like the 9th form, splashing water flow with evasive footwork, and so on. And I realize I kind of just, finished Tanjiro without doing anything else for Nezuko, so let's hop back over to her and finish up this sibling pair.
Ouch! Hey, let go! Stop, please! Ow! How old are you anyway? I'm 37!
So like we covered before, Nezuko used to be a human, and a caring older sibling at that, until the night that Muzan gave the family a visit and left her as the only survivor with a healthy dose of demon blood to turn her into a monster. Which did work, kind of. Maybe it's just an anomaly, or maybe it's the power of love. But Nezuko managed to hold on to some of her humanity and feelings throughout her transformation into a demon, even protecting Tanjiro when by all rights she should have tried to eat him to regain strength. She did lose a sizable amount of her mental faculties though, no longer able to speak, but she can still understand people, and generally just acts like a younger version of herself. She can even shrink down to fit in this box, or grow back to normal size. She can even get larger if she needs to, or shrink down quickly enough to avoid sword swings. But this size changing is only one of her abilities, so let's see what else she can do. As mentioned before, she has some special pink flames that only hurt demons, can hit you really hard, and heals a bunch. Nezuko also doesn't use any weapons or anything like that, she instead just rips things to shreds with her claws. And just like how she can go from tiny baby Nezuko to normal Nezuko when she's relaxing outside of her box, she can also turn to a much larger version of herself whenever she's pissed off. And when in this form, she was strong enough to challenge Daki to a 1v1. Something that Tanjiro couldn't really do without relying on his Dance of the Fire God, and that almost killed him because the boy forgot to breathe. Nezuko has helped take down a bunch of very powerful demons, including one that could split themselves into multiple different forms with different powers. And during this fight, she tanked multiple lightning strikes while impaled. It's also here that Nezuko fully earned her humanity back in the eyes of whatever god is in charge of the Demon Slayer world. Because while Tanjiro was effectively having a panic attack, unable to choose between staying and protecting Nezuko from the sunlight, or saving people from a demon, Nezuko chose for him, sacrificing herself to kick her brother to the demon, exposing herself to the sunlight and burning away. Or at least that's what her and Tanjiro thought would happen. Instead, she was fine, being the first demon to walk in the sun. So aside from not bursting into flames in the sunlight, what do these abilities lead us to? Well, I kinda want to go in order here, meaning Nezuko was going to start where her brother ended. As a monk, giving her unarmored defense and movement, and for a little bit of her healing, uncanny metabolism gives her back some focus points and heals her. But this is also where Nezuko awakens her pink fire, since before this she only really slashed at things with her claws, and until her fire was in play, she could only really do superficial damage to other demons. And the new Warrior of the Elements lets Nezuko get some very early fire. Not quite anti-demon fire, but still fire. And going all the way to level 6 gives her Elemental Burst, so Nezuko can in fact blow you up with her pink flames for 3d8 fire damage, and she can do this 3 times before having to refill her focus points. I also went ahead and gave her Elemental Adept at level 4, obviously for fire damage, so her damage can't be resisted, and makes it a little bit more reliable. Also, stunning and empowered strikes make sure that her attacks still hit hard, even if her normal damage is resisted. But that's going to be all for Monk, since Nezuko is a lot stronger and more of a hassle to demons than just this, and I have the perfect thing in mind for her. Now, we can't go Paladin. Not only does she not have the charisma for it, but she really doesn't do magic, and she certainly doesn't follow a strict oath or have any buffing auras. So for striking Paladin and any other caster from the list, I think the Barbarian holds the rest of Nezuko's levels. And this really shows during her fight with Daki, as she grows in size and starts to easily overpower the Upper Moon with her pink anti-demon flames. Not only was Nezuko in a mindless rage here, having to be restrained by her brother so she didn't go berserk, but again, her flames did more than just hurt Daki. They slowed her healing, which in the case of vampires and other similar undead, that usually only happens when they take radiant or acid damage. And our only option to do that is to take 3 levels into Zealot Barbarian for Divine Fury, giving her some radiant damage on her first attack, and making her extra hard to keep down by removing the cost of resurrection. But that's only the first few levels in Barbarian. Nezuko in this form is competing with some of the strongest demons in Muzan's army, ones that have been fighting and eating humans for hundreds of years, and she's only been one for a short time. And it's not like those other demons can really even hurt her. Sure, they can injure her temporarily, but she'll just heal it up almost instantly. While on her end, she can slow their healing and maybe even kill them with her special fire. And that's what I want to focus on for a little bit here, how unkillable Nezuko can seem, which means jumping from 3rd level all the way to 11th level for Relentless Rage. So if she drops to 0 HP, she can just pass a con save and not die. This also means she gets fanatical focus for saving throws, and she can technically buff people around her with Zell's presence, but that's not really Nezuko's thing. But more importantly, to cover her healing, the new durable feat does that amazingly, letting Nezuko use her hit dice mid-fight to heal. Plus her total of 18 constitution from an ASI means not only is she going to have a ton of HP thanks to the tough feat from her background, but she's also going to keep refilling that HP pool as the fight goes on. No matter how many times you cut Nezuko down, she's going to keep fighting. And yeah, that's Nezuko.
Inosuke!
Big Boss Inosuke!
Big Boss Inosuke!
Inosuke!
You know, I really wish Demon Slayer hadn't taken a break right after the training arc. It kinda means I can't talk about some of the final fights with 3/4 of the team I'm making. Oh well, instead I can talk about something else, like you subscribing to the channel for more team builds and potential homebrew in the future. Like I said near the beginning of the video, I actually made a Demon Slayer class for Old 5e, so if enough of you guys comment wanting to see that, maybe I'll update it to the new rules, although that might take a while. I think I made like 60 breathing techniques because I have no self-control. Now before we move on to the next team member, I just want to take up a little bit more of your time to remind you guys that we are partnered with Homie and the Dude, the creators of the Wandering Tavern. A Ghibli-inspired D&D setting with over 20 built-in locations, 15 battle maps for you to cause chaos in, fully statted NPCs so your DM can set up for emotional trauma down the road, new magical items, and 30 plus plot hooks for various quests, all contained within a single floating island that might have a bit of a militia problem, and an undead problem. You know, maybe it might be a good idea to have an escape route ready, just in case. And for that, there are actually 6 fully built out airships, or Zephyrs, that you can use in your daring escape. You could run an entire standalone campaign here on this floating island, or you could just use it as a unique city in your own setting, which I am 100% doing as soon as I finish getting it ready. And using our code GMG, you can get 10% off your order. It lets the guys over at Homie and the Dude know that I sent you over there, and like, it's a free discount. You could get lunch with that, or if you're a dice goblin like me, you can buy more dice. Anyways, go check them out, use my code. Now back to Demon Slayer. You know how a lot of shows have that one super annoying character that, sure, they have their moments of being cool or good people, but most of the time they're on screen they just annoy you for one reason or another? Well, for me, that character is Zenitsu. I don't really hate him, and he has some cool moments, but most of the time he has on screen is him screaming, crying, or both because he's either scared or because a girl didn't pay him enough attention. And honestly, my favorite part of the anime that has him in it is during the fight with Daki where he's asleep for most of the entire fight. We'll touch on that here in a minute, but real quick, let's take a look at his backstory and see why he's so... him. Zenitsu did have a troubled past. Without his parents, he really didn't have anyone to show him the right way to be a person or how to navigate the world. This unfortunately led him to giving away all of his money to a girl he fell for in hopes of them running away together, only for her to take his money and run, leaving Zenitsu with a mountain of debt. Thankfully for Zenitsu though, somebody did pay off his debt for him. Only in return, he had to start training under that someone. This person though turned out to be an ex-Demon Slayer. But not just any Demon Slayer, they were the previous Thunder Hashira. And that being said, this training was pretty tough on Zenitsu, who by nature is a bit of a coward. So much so that he tried to hide from his master in a tree to avoid training, only for that tree to get struck by lightning, which somehow dyed his hair blonde. Surprisingly though, Zenitsu lived and went on to the final selection, a 7-day survival test where you have to make it from the bottom of a mountain all the way to the top within 7 days, and, survive in a mountain full of demons. And if you live, you become a Demon Slayer. Somehow, Zenitsu managed to survive and officially became a Demon Slayer. He even got his own bird, but unlike the others, this one can't talk. It's also not a crow. And it's not too long after this that Tanjiro runs into Zenitsu again, finding him begging a girl to marry him because he's going to die soon. Yeah, so let's see. Clearly, like Tanjiro, he is a human. And with that little backstory we have for Zenitsu, the Wayfarer background, which is really just the urchin background with a fresh coat of paint, looks like the best option here. This background gives him the Lucky feat oddly enough, and for his human extra origin feat, I went with Savage Attacker since nothing else really calls out to me for our cowardly swordsman here. And before we get to his actual skills with a sword, there's one more thing Zenitsu has that's very special. Very much like Tanjiro, Zenitsu has one of his senses turned up to 11, but rather than his sense of smell, it's his sense of hearing. And it is so strong he can sometimes hear people's minds, read their emotions, and even get a feel for their personality just by listening to the sounds their bodies make naturally. He was even able to tell that Nezuko was a demon without seeing her. And in one of my favorite moments for Zenitsu, he risked his life to protect Nezuko from someone even though he knew she was a demon, using his body to protect the box while he was beaten on, all because he made a promise to Tanjiro, and he knew that whoever was in the box wasn't evil. So he's not all bad. Like I said, he has his moments, and sometimes he's a badass, like when he solo killed this freaky spider with a human face, and managed to hold off the effects of its venom that was slowly killing / turning him into a demon long enough for someone to get to him and give him an antidote. And real quick, let's talk about his skills with a sword, since they are both impressive and kinda weird. So during Zenitsu's training with his master, he was supposed to learn 10 forms of thunder breathing, with thunder breathing focusing on powerful and fast attacks. And while the other student there learned nearly all of them, Zenitsu could only do one, the 7th style Thunder Clap and Flash, which is pretty much just a dash combined with an unsheathing attack. But since Zenitsu could only do the one, he decided to go all in and made it his own, making his own version with multiple dashes and rapid resheathing and unsheathing. And with how fast he moves during this, Tanjiro mistook the attack for an actual lightning strike. And again, despite the visuals, these are all normal sword swings, which implies that Zenitsu broke the sound barrier with his sword. And we'll get to that in a minute along with his sleep thing, but first it is time to look at his stats. So seeing as how Zenitsu is one of the fastest characters on the show, and never really gets as buff as Tanjiro or Inosuke, eye dexterity is a given. And the same goes for wisdom, since the best way to get that sort of hearing, the kind that lets you read minds and emotions, is going to be a mix of perception and insight, both of which use wisdom. I also think a decent strength is fine. He does get pretty toned here, but again, not nearly as much as the others. Some constitution to deal with poison, and if you are surprised that Zenitsu is dumping charisma, you shouldn't be. Not with an attitude like his. He is lucky Tanjiro is a saint, or I don't think this team would still even be together. And because Zenitsu is a bit more dexty than Tanjiro, I ended up going with a monk again. And even the same monk for his starter class, since they do kind of the same-ish stuff, just in slightly different ways. But whereas Tanjiro only dipped his toes into monk, Zenitsu is going a lot further in, a whole 12 levels. Grabbing him deflect attacks, the path of the Kensei level 3, and the speedy feat at level 4 so he can be the fastest in the group. And since his constitution is still relatively low, the evasion feature will keep his HP up even if he fails on his dex saves. But the main feature is all the way at level 11, Sharpen the Blade, letting him spend focus points to give his weapon a bonus to attack and damage rolls. Oh, and he also grabbed the solution to his sleep fighting at level 8 with the old Fighting Initiate feat, which I did give it a +1 to dex here because that's how feats work now, even though this feat hasn't been updated to the 2024 rules yet. Anyways, I thought the best way to do that would be to give him the blind fighting style, and just have that be more or less flavored as him being asleep. Since that whole thing is apparently part of his hearing, he hears everything around him even while asleep and is still able to fight, react, talk, and even strategize while fully knocked out. Unfortunately, he also doesn't really remember any of this, so he usually wakes up pretty confused. Now 12 levels of monk might seem like a lot, but trust me, it's all part of the plan. And the next part of that plan is to get his Thunderclap and Flash, and that attack is devastating, usually killing whatever demon it's aimed at before they can even react. The only one who was able to survive it was Daki, and that was because she's a special case. And speaking of the Daki fight, that fight lasted forever. And sure, he didn't really fight Gyotaro very much, but he was still able to dodge and block plenty of attacks, technically while asleep, and while keeping the pressure up on Daki. Plus he can be pretty sneaky when needed, and was able to roll with a hit, taking minimal damage after Daki sucker punched him through a wall. He did still get knocked unconscious, but he didn't die, and that's the important thing. And I think that right there gives us a hint for what class we should go with next. Something that will let Zenitsu roll with a hit, and get some really strong burst damage off all at once. And I think that's going to be the Assassin Rogue. Rogues typically only make one attack per turn, especially with Assassinate, and that one attack hits like a truck. And again, it's implied that either A, Zenitsu is moving from his starting point to the enemy fast enough to create a sonic boom, or B, his sword is moving so fast after leaving the sheath that it's the one breaking the sound barrier. And either way, that is ridiculous, both in terms of the sword not shattering into pieces after hitting something, or his bones not evaporating into dust after generating that much force. Now, since I want to keep everyone around the same level, he's only going to take 5 levels in Rogue to get the Assassinate feature for double damage on his first attack. Wait, they changed it? Let me see. If you damage a creature with sneak attack, they take extra damage equal to your Rogue level. Huh. You know, I didn't think they'd do it, but they hit the Assassin pretty damn hard with a Nerf gun. Yeah, oh well, it's fine. The old one was a little bit busted just to dip in from Paladin, so yeah, whatever. He still gets Assassinate, but he also gets Cunning Action and Weapon Mastery, which I always love. and Uncanny Dodge in case Deflect Attack isn't as good of an option for something. He's also going to grab his last ASI here, which I'm going to use to put a +1 into Dex and a +1 into Wisdom. You could easily swap a few of the levels here, go more Rogue for more Sneak Attack die, but the way they nerfed Assassinate kinda makes that harder to want, so technically this build works better on the old Assassin. Oh well. Zenitsu, give us a little bit more of this kind of stuff, and not so much of that, and I think we'll get along just fine.
Thunder breathing. First form. Thunderclap and flash!
When I got into Demon Slayer, I did not think one of my favorite characters would be the Wild Child doing his best Cubone impression by wearing the head of his deceased mother figure. That's a lot darker when I put it into words. So yeah, Inosuke, the crazy boar boy that can do this, and breaks his own swords that he can saw into stuff instead of just slashing. He was literally raised by boars after being dropped into a river by his mother to save him. And not only that, he taught himself a breathing style. Well, technically he made up his own. See, normally breathing styles are derived from the first style, sun breathing, used by Yorichi, who by the way almost 1v1'd Muzan. And later on he tried to teach sun breathing to Demon Slayers, but they just couldn't quite grasp it, so instead they made their own stuff based off of sun breathing, like water breathing, lightning, fire, stone, wind, and so on. And even some of them have their own offshoots. But Inosuke didn't have a teacher. He learned it all on his own by mimicking boars in the wild and created beast breathing, which for some reason is listed as an offshoot of wind breathing despite there being no real connection between the two breathing styles. This breathing style focuses on mimicking the actions and senses of wild animals, mostly boars given who he was raised by, but he also took some stuff from wolves and bears, mostly because he liked them. And there really isn't a lot left for his backstory that I'm aware of. I might have missed something here or there, but honestly he is a simple character. He's kind of an ass sometimes, like when he was beating up Zenitsu for protecting Nezuko, but he learns and grows, even if he never really stops being crazy. So instead of focusing on his past, let's look at what he's going to be. Like most everyone here, Inosuke is a human. Yes, he is more animalistic than most people, and he wears a boar on his head, but that is just a mask at the end of the day, not his actual head. So with the new rules, they did slightly change the Outlander background when they made it into the guide background. It fits a little bit less, but it's the same deal, with Inosuke growing up far away from civilization and other humans. And honestly, I'm surprised he's even able to speak given how young he was when he was dropped in the river. So, I made Inosuke human with the tough feat for his extra origin feat, and yes, I give tough to a lot of melee characters, but that's typically because they take a lot of big hits, like, I don't know, getting stabbed clean through the chest and apparently casually moving your organs out of the way to minimize the damage. So when I see stuff like this, I'm gonna give tough out when I can, okay? Plus, since it's an origin feat now, you can only get it by being human or having a background that gives you tough. And speaking of origin feats, the guide background gives him Magic Initiate. You can mostly ignore this if you want. I use it to give him the Resistance Cantrip and Longstrider. Now just looking at Inosuke and seeing how he fights and acts, getting his stats is going to be pretty easy. He leans heavily into Strength and Con, while not being clumsy, so 16 Con, 15 Strength, and 14 Dex, meaning his AC won't be all that bad by the end of this. But his soft stats are another story, with the highest being Wisdom at 12 since he does have good hearing and sense of direction. Just not on the same level as Zenitsu or Tanjiro. He also may have a pretty boy face and could easily be mistaken for a girl with like the lightest amount of cleanup, but just looking pretty doesn't mean you have high charisma. Inosuke is brash, butting into conversations, doesn't understand social norms, and has a really hard time actually speaking what's on his mind. But he still has a 10 in it because he can talk and communicate a bit. It's not the best, but it's fine. But on the other hand, he has trouble reading and following directions, let alone forming any sort of plan outside of just rushing in and slicing things up until they stop moving. So in this case, he's going to be dumping intelligence. That's not to say he's dumb in combat. There is a reason why some power scaling things have battle IQ and then regular IQ, but intelligence is only one stat here, and they kind of play it up with how he lacks schooling, especially with him constantly forgetting names. And with his stats out of the way, we can now look at some of Inosuke's feats and see what class fits him best. But hint, like with most of these builds, he's going to be multi-classed. I talked before about his beast breathing, something he developed himself, but unlike the other breathing styles that use fancy moves to do special attacks, block, and anything else, Inosuke's fangs, yes, fangs not forms, are all pretty straightforward. First Fang Pierce is a stab, Second Fang Slice is a crosscut, and Third Fang Devour is just a dual horizontal slice, and so on. But some are at least a bit different, like the Seventh Fang Spatial Awareness, where through his sense of touch alone, by feeling the vibrations in the air, Inosuke was able to sense all the demons on Spider Demon Mountain, but unfortunately that is the only one of his fangs that is not a slash of some sort, or at least an attack. But another thing he can do that helps with his fighting is he is able to dislocate and relocate all of his joints at will, letting him slither through a tunnel like a snake or extend the reach of his attacks. Also, I mentioned it before, but Inosuke can move his organs around, and isn't even all that bothered by getting stabbed to the chest since it didn't damage anything important. He was even able to stave off poison from an upper moon long enough for Nezuko to come and save him, which is really impressive considering Tanjiro got hit with it and was blacking out in less than a minute, again only being saved by Nezuko. But for now, let's focus on his offensive stuff first. And since all of his special attacks are just normal slashes in various forms, we don't need to worry about a bunch of fancy maneuvers from Battlemaster. Inosuke just hits really hard, and he even serrated his swords to make them deal more damage, even if they don't cut as cleanly. And the best way to just flat out hit harder is to crit more often. And despite a few changes, the champion fighter still has their improved critical, meaning Inosuke can crit on 19 or 20. He's also going to grab the 2-up in fighting style, since yeah, that's 2 of them right there. And I would argue that taking off so much material from the swords to make them serrated would also make them light weapons, so they actually work with 2-up in fighting. He's also going to get the dual wielder feat at level 4 so he can make a bonus action attack with his offhand weapon. And something that I hope I'm getting right, the level 10 feature Heroic Warrior. This is a new thing that gives Inosuke heroic inspiration on his turn if he doesn't have it. And from what I understand, this acts a lot like old inspiration, but it's just a lot easier to get, letting him re-roll effectively once per turn. So Inosuke can get 3 advantage on one attack every turn, increasing his chances of landing a crit. And because that is level 10, he's going to grab 2 more ASIs, 1 for strength and 1 for con. Plus, I went ahead and gave him the unarmed fighting style for his extra fighting style, since he does know how to fight unarmed, again growing up with boars and fighting off animals in the woods. And that works for a good bit of his basic stuff, but there are a few other things that we still need to cover, like his resistance to poison, the ability to climb all over the place like a bug, and extending the reach of his attacks by dislocating his joints, which cannot be pleasant, but I guess if you do it long enough, you just don't feel the pain anymore. And fitting for the wild child running around in nothing but pants and a boar mask, Inosuke is going to take his last remaining levels in Barbarian, all 7 of them. Which does mean he isn't going to need any armor at all with a decent con and dex score. He also gets Reckless Attack, which again, dislocating your shoulder to get a little bit closer to your target seems like maybe something you don't do with a clear head. And he also gets Instinctive Pounce. But that still leaves his subclass, and for once I am so glad that this actually makes sense, but being raised by animals makes it very easy for him to go with the Wild Heart Barbarian. It is unclear if you can actually talk to animals outside of the already talking birds though. But he is resilient enough to justify the bear rage, and again, he does like bears, and he can take a beating. They also did make Bear Barbarian more fair in this version too, making it so you are still vulnerable to Force, Necrotic, Radiant, and Psychic damage, instead of just Psychic damage. So it is a little less tanky, but still very good. And I mentioned it before about his weird ability to climb in places where he realistically shouldn't be able to, and he actually gets something for that at level 6 of Barbarian with Aspect of the Wild Panther, giving him a climbing speed equal to his walking speed. And that leaves just one thing that we kind of already have covered with Reckless Attack, his weird stretchy arms, which he uses pretty much exclusively for his 9th Fang Extending Bendy Slash. He is great at naming abilities, just like me. So, remember when I said that we didn't need maneuvers for Inosuke? Well, I lied a little bit. We need 1. Lunging Attack, which we can thankfully get from the Martial Adept feat. Again, I added a +1 to strength for this, because that's how new feats work. And I use this feat to give him the Lunging Attack maneuver and the Precision Attack maneuver. He can only use 1 maneuver per rest anyway, and I figured that Piercing Attack would work well with the first Fang, but honestly, go with whatever you want, it doesn't really matter for this one. Oh, and there is still Spatial Awareness, but that was kind of covered all the way back at level 2 by Danger Sense. It's not a perfect match by any means, but the idea is mostly the same. And getting anything with the range to cover an entire mountain would have required at least Locate Creature, and that boy ain't casting spells. And with his poison resistance already covered by his Bear Rage, that's it for mechanical stuff. Meaning Inosuke is now free to go running off into the distance, challenging swordsmen to fights with your bare hands. Okay, that was a long one. Sometimes characters go by quickly and sometimes they have a lot to explain. So, before I go, I just want to remind you to subscribe and go check out the Wandering Tavern using my discount code GMG for 10% off. As always, my testers are awesome. These builds always take a little bit of time and a couple reworks. And we had some alternate build ideas for Nezuko using like the Rune Knight Fighter and Dragon Monk, which seems like a nice alternate build idea. And of course, thank you to my patrons. You all support these videos, and I literally cannot thank you enough. We are also approaching the goal of 10,000 subs by the end of the year, so let's see if we can make that final push. And I of course have more teams on the way. Next up should be Shield Hero, and if you are on the $3 or $5 tier of my Patreon, you can vote in the polls to decide what team I make next. And you can find the link to my Patreon down in the description below. That's gonna do it for today though. I will see you all next time, and as always, have a wonderful day.